Welcome to Fireside History, where the past comes to life. If you enjoy this retelling, don't forget to like, comment and subscribe to hear more. The Krakatoa Eruption, 1883. The sea was calm that morning, a deceptive calm stretched across the narrow waters of the Sunda Strait, the channel separating the great islands of Sumatra and Java. Palm fronds swayed gently in the breeze. Fishermen cast their nets from small outrigger canoes, and on the distant horizon the silhouette of an island loomed, jagged, uneven, and smouldering faintly. This was Krakatoa, an island most Europeans in 1883 would never have heard of, until it tore its way into history. But let us pause. Before we rush to its fiery crescendo, before the earth trembles and the sea rises in monstrous fury, we must first understand the world as it was. For history is never a single moment. It is a slow accumulation of choices, pressures, and portents that finally, violently, reveal themselves. It is the early 1880s. The Dutch East Indies are a colony in the firm grip of the Netherlands, though the land itself is restless. The islands of Java and Sumatra are thick with jungle, their coasts teeming with trade. Steamships now plough these waters alongside traditional sailing craft, ferrying spices, tin, coffee and people through one of the busiest maritime crossroads in the world. But beneath this surface prosperity, the clink of trade coins in Batavia, the hammering of dockyards in Anja, lies a geological giant. The very crust of the earth here is fractured, tortured by the restless forces of the Pacific Ring of Fire. And Krakatoa, that dark outline against the sky, sits directly upon it. The island itself is not one, but three peaks. Rakata, the largest, towers steep and volcanic. To its north, two smaller cones, Perboatan and Danan, form the broken ridgeline. Villagers live along the coastal fringes, their homes tucked beneath coconut palms, their livelihoods tied to the sea. Children play barefoot on black volcanic sand, blissfully unaware that they are playing atop a bomb. From the very start of 1883, subtle signs whispered of what was to come. Mariners reported strange clouds rising from the island. A sulphurous odour drifted across the strait. Earth tremors shook porcelain off colonial tables in Batavia, 100 miles away. On the 20th of May, the whispers grew louder. A German ship, the Elizabeth, passed within sight of Krakatoa. Captain Lindemann recorded a black column of smoke, rising thousands of feet into the sky, and showers of ash falling upon his decks. Birds wheeled away from the island in restless flocks. The crew murmured nervously, eyes fixed on the smoking mountain. For weeks after, small eruptions rattled the cone of Perboatan. Each blast hurled pumice and ash into the air, dusting nearby villages. Islanders in Ketimbang and Anja swept the grey powder from their thatched roofs, muttering prayers to ward off the wrath of the spirits. To many these signs were simply the mountain exhaling, the earth's natural temperament. Volcanoes were feared, yes, but they were also part of the land. Yet scientists, or at least those few who paid attention, sensed something deeper. Among them was Rogier Verbeek, a Dutch geologist posted in the East Indies. Precise, bespectacled, and endlessly curious, Verbeek collected reports with the determination of a man assembling a puzzle whose picture no one else could see. He noted the ash columns, the tremors, the unusual red sunsets glimpsed across Java. His colleagues in Batavia's colonial administration paid little heed. Mountains smoke, one remarked. It is their nature. But Verbeek kept writing, his notebooks filled with sketches of Krakatoa's outline, maps of the Sunda Strait, and letters from ship captains alarmed by what they saw. He sensed that the island was stirring in ways far more dangerous than before. Meanwhile, life went on. The busy port of Angers bustled with traders, Dutch officials, and locals alike. The telegraph office clicked with messages bound for Europe. Steam ferries carried passengers across the strait, their decks hot beneath the tropical sun. On Java's fertile plains, farmers bent beneath the rice harvest, cicadas buzzing in chorus all around them. And all the while, Krakatoa rumbled. By June, explosions were frequent. Columns of black smoke rose miles into the sky, visible to ships far at sea. At night, a dull red glow flickered on the horizon. Some sailors swore they saw lightning playing in the ash clouds, a spectral fire dancing in silence. But it was in August that the island truly awoke. On the afternoon of 26th August 1883, at precisely 1 o'clock in the afternoon, Krakatoa roared with a force that stunned even the most hardened of witnesses. A column of ash, incandescent and terrible, shot over 20 miles into the sky. Imagine it, a jet of fire and pulverized rock, piercing the very heavens, flattening clouds, staining the blue vault black. In the villages along the Java coast, men and women shaded their eyes, staring upwards in awe and dread. The sky rained cinders. Ash coated the sea in a greasy scum. The day turned to twilight. One eyewitness, a Dutch controller named Willem Beyerink, recorded that the thunder of the eruption was like a continuous cannonade. Windows rattled, roof tiles cracked, horses panicked and bolted, dragging carts through narrow streets. And still, the volcano did not relent. Through the evening, Krakatoa erupted in violent pulses. Each explosion hurled boulders into the sea. Ash clouds drifted west, plunging Sumatra into premature night. Ships anchored at Telok Betong pitched violently on the waves as pumice rained down upon their decks. Imagine being aboard one of them, the Dutch steamship Gouverneur-Generaal Loudon. Its captain, Captain Lindemann, watched in mounting horror as the sky boiled. Ash rained thick, smothering the funnels, coating every surface. The air stank of sulphur, choking, acrid. The crew fought desperately to keep the decks clear, sweeping away cinders that threatened to ignite. Above them, the sound was unearthly. Not a single thunderclap, but a rolling, ceaseless detonation. The very air vibrated with pressure, drums beating against eardrums. Some men clutched their heads and cried out, driven half mad by the sound. And then came the waves, at first small, then growing. Tsunamis rippled outward from the island. Walls of water rushed towards the Javanese coast. In Angers, fishermen's boats were torn from their moorings, dashed against the shore. Families fled inland, scrambling through palm groves, clutching children to their chests. By nightfall, thousands huddled on higher ground, staring out at a sea lit hellishly by the glow of Krakatoa's fires. The mountain roared on, each explosion a reminder that worse was yet to come. For the great eruption, the one that would split the world, had not yet arrived. On the 27th of August, 1883, the people of Java and Sumatra awoke beneath skies already bruised with ash. The sun was no golden disk that morning. It was a pale smudge, its light strangled by the volcanic pall that hung heavy across the strait. Birds were silent. The air was thick, tasting of sulphur and iron. A damp grey snow of ash drifted down, coating every palm leaf, every rooftop, every human breath. And out to sea, Krakatoa burned. From the small Javanese village of Merak, children clutched at their mothers' skirts, pointing at the horizon. Flames danced upon the silhouette of the mountain. Enormous clouds, black at their base, crimson at their edges, billowed upward, alive with flickers of lightning. The sound was endless. Not thunder, not cannon fire, but something greater, something deeper. The earth itself was speaking. In Angers, Dutch officials peered through telescopes from the veranda of the telegraph office, their faces pale. Messages crackled along the wires to Batavia, eruption increasing, sky darkening, waves rising. Operators worked with trembling fingers, knowing their words might be the last to pass through the line. At sea, hundreds of sailors fought to hold their vessels steady. The air was suffocating. Ash clogged sails, hissed as it struck the hot funnels of steamships and collected ankle-deep across the decks. Men coughed, spat black, and cursed through gritted teeth. And then, at 6:44 in the morning, Krakatoa unleashed its wrath. The unholy explosion ripped through the island like a cannon from the gods. The sound was unlike anything ever heard by human ears. A shockwave burst outward, so vast, so violent that it shattered eardrums of sailors miles away. Windows rattled in Batavia, 100 miles distant. On the island of Rodriguez in the Indian Ocean, nearly 3,000 miles away, a policeman noted in his logbook a strange and violent concussion like distant guns. But for those close by, the sound was only the beginning, and it would only get louder. The sea heaved as though struck by a giant's fist. A wall of water surged outward from the island, racing for the shores of Java and Sumatra. In the fishing town of Telok Betong, the ocean withdrew suddenly, leaving fish flapping upon bare sand. Curious children ran to gather them, before their parents screamed in horror, dragging them back. Moments later, a black wall of water, higher than the coconut palms, crashed ashore. Houses splintered like toys. Boats were lifted and hurled inland. Families scrambled for the hills, but many were caught in the torrent, swept screaming into the sea. On the Loudon, windows shattered with the pressure. The decks rattled as though shaken by giants. Panic threatened to consume the passengers. Some screamed that they should abandon ship, leaping into lifeboats that would surely be crushed in the chaos. Lindemann's response was ruthless. He stormed from the bridge, seized a terrified sailor by the collar, and hurled him back to the deck. "Stay at your post," he bellowed. "Anyone leaves this ship, they die." He knew the only hope lay in discipline. He ordered cloths, soaked in seawater, to be tied across every mouth and nose to stave off suffocation. He commanded constant shoveling of ash from the decks, lest the weight swamp the ship. He kept the engines driving, forcing the Loudon forward through seas littered with pumice and burning cinders. Then came the wave. A tsunami rose behind the ship, a dark wall blotting out the ashen sky. Lindemann swung the Loudon's bow to meet it head-on, the only chance of survival. She climbed, timbers screaming, decks slanting so steeply that passengers slid across the planking. At the crest, she hung, trembling on the edge of destruction, before plunging down into the trough with a crash that sent spray exploding into the air. But she held. The Loudon had met the wave and lived, but Krakatoa was not finished. At 10:02 a.m., another great explosion tore the central cone of the island apart. Danan, one of its smaller peaks, disintegrated in a column of fire and rock. Ash darkened the skies so completely that day turned to night. Lamps were lit in Batavia. Farmers in central Java stumbled from their fields, unable to see their own hands. The air filled with fragments, pumice stones the size of fists, glowing red as they fell. Some rained upon villages, smashing through roofs. Others struck the sea with a hiss of steam, bobbing like strange deadly rafts. On the Sumatra shore, survivors spoke of a roar so deep it seemed to vibrate in their bones. Some fell to their knees in prayer, believing the end of days had come. The sky had become night. Lanterns burned on the decks of the Loudon at midday, their glow feeble against the choking dark. Pumice drifted so thick it carried uprooted trees and corpses upon its surface. The ship pushed through a floating graveyard. The smell of sulphur and decay was everywhere. Exhaustion gnawed at the crew. Some begged Lindemann to turn back, to beach the vessel on Sumatra's coast rather than fight on. But Lindemann knew the shore was death. Waves and fire had already erased the villages there. To approach was to be dashed to splinters. "No," he rasped, ash caking his face. "We stay at sea." "It's the only way." When another wave approached, taller even than the first, he gave a single order. "Bow into it, engines steady, hold her straight." The Loudon rose once more, climbing the black water like a cork, creaking at every seam. Passengers clung to each other, screaming as the bow tipped skyward. Then down she plunged, smashing through the surf, shuddering, but unbroken. Again and again the sea struck, and each time the Loudon obeyed her captain's hand. Less than 40 minutes later, at 10:41 a.m., the final cataclysmic explosion came, and Krakatoa exploded with a force beyond comprehension. This final blast, in a single moment, unleashed a staggering 200 megatons of energy, a single detonation greater than all earlier eruptions combined, and far beyond anything humanity has ever engineered. Krakatoa's heart was breaking open. The pressure beneath the earth, built over centuries, found sudden release. A detonation tore away what remained of the northern cone. Columns of ash shot 50 miles into the stratosphere. So high they punched into levels of air where no storm clouds had ever gone. Fine particles spread in a canopy, a veil that would dim the world's sunlight for months to come. The entire northern half of the island, Perbewatan and what remained of Darnan, vanished. The sea itself rushed in to fill the void, contacting magma so hot it turned to superheated steam in an instant. The result was the loudest sound ever recorded in human history. Ships now hundreds of miles distant recorded seas, heaving strangely, the swell confused and violent. Barometers quivered. The very air seemed unstable, quaking as if it too were afraid. Sailors aboard the British ship Norham Castle, 40 miles from the island, staggered as though struck. The captain later wrote, "So violent are the explosions that the eardrums of over half my crew have been shattered. My last thought is that my eardrum has been blown out, for I am deaf as a post." The blast was heard over 1/10 of the globe. From Perth to Manila, from Sri Lanka to Alice Springs, the earth carried the sound of Krakatoa's fury. The sound wave circled the earth, not once, but 7 times. Barographs in Washington, D.C., in Paris, in London, recorded the pulse as it passed, a global heartbeat of destruction. The loudest sound in human history ripped the air apart. On the Loudon, men collapsed, clutching shattered eardrums, eyes bleeding from the pressure. Passengers lay writhing on the decks, deafened, stunned. Every window left unbroken now burst. The iron hull groaned like a tortured animal. For a moment it seemed impossible that anything could survive. But Lindemann stood fast at the wheel, his ears ringing with silence, his vision blurred. Yet his hands never left the helm. When the final tsunami roared out from Krakatoa, he swung the Loudon's bow once more into its teeth. The ship climbed a mountain of water higher than any they had faced, balanced upon its crest like a matchstick, and then thundered down the far side into the trough, her hull creaking, her engines pounding like a heart, refusing to stop. And when the seas stilled, when the sky fell silent save for the endless hiss of ash, the Loudon was still afloat. Her decks were buried in cinders, her passengers deaf, broken, and ash-stained. her captain hollow-eyed and bleeding, but she lived. The Loudon had sailed through the apocalypse and endured. Others were not so fortunate. That final tsunami defied imagination, and it meant death to thousands. In Anya, people screamed as the sea withdrew, dragging ships into the shallows. For a moment there was silence, and then a wall of water, over 100 feet high, roared towards the town. Witnesses described a black mountain moving across the bay, its crest foaming white, its base churning with uprooted trees and wreckage. The wave struck with the force of a battering ram. Stone buildings crumbled. The lighthouse collapsed, its iron frame twisted like wire. Men, women and children vanished in an instant, carried inland upon a tide of death. In Sumatra, the town of Ketimbang suffered the same fate. Entire villages were erased. Palm groves became rafts. The sea rushed miles inland, sweeping away buffalo, wagons, people, everything. Those who survived spoke of a silence after, broken only by the cries of the injured and the endless crackle of falling ash. And above it all, the sky was a battlefield. Lightning flickered through the ash clouds, branching like veins of fire. Thunder, real thunder now, mingled with the continuous detonation of the volcano. Pebbles and sand rained from the sky. The air was so thick with ash that men lit lanterns at noon. Aboard the Loudon, Lindemann's crew still fought to breathe. They soaked cloths in seawater and tied them over their mouths. The ship creaked and shuddered as pumice stones piled against her hull, threatening to capsize her. Lindemann gave the order to keep the engines running at full steam, to plough through the floating barrier. Inch by inch the ship pushed forward, her funnels glowing with heat, her men hollow-eyed with terror. In the fishing boats that dotted the strait, there was no such salvation. Hundreds were overturned, splintered or swallowed whole. Families clung to planks, only to be buried beneath the next onrushing wave. By the late afternoon, Krakatoa was no longer a mountain. It was a caldera, a vast hollow where land had been, swallowed by the sea. The once proud island of 3 peaks was reduced to fragments. Rakata, the southern cone, remained scarred but standing. The rest, gone. In its place, a churning, boiling cauldron of water and fire. The tsunamis rolled outward in every direction. Waves slammed the coasts of Banten and Lampung, obliterating villages, uprooting forests, carrying survivors and corpses alike miles inland. Some waves reached as far as the Arabian Peninsula, as far as South Africa, where tide gauges recorded their arrival. The death toll mounted with every passing hour, though none could count it yet. As the day bled into night, the world remained cloaked in darkness. Ash fell ceaselessly. In Batavia, street lamps glowed at midday, their light struggling through the haze. Residents swept ash from rooftops in vain, for it returned as fast as it was cleared. Ships in the Sunda Strait groped blindly through the gloom, their captains fearful of reefs and debris. The sea itself was transformed. Vast rafts of pumice floated, stretching for miles, pale, porous rock born from the shattered heart of the mountain. Some clumps were so dense they trapped dead birds, uprooted trees, even the bodies of men. And still the volcano roared, not in single explosions now, but in a constant, grinding fury. Like the breath of some monstrous forge, it bellowed and belched, lightning racing through its crown. For those who lived, it was a vision of the world's end. Yet even amidst the terror, the human spirit persisted. In the ruined port of Anja, a handful of survivors stumbled through the wreckage, dragging the injured to higher ground. A Dutch officer recorded by lantern light, "We are surrounded by the dead. The sea has carried away our homes. We hear cries in the darkness, but dare not move for fear of the waves returning." On the Loudon, Lindemann refused to give up. He rallied his crew, forcing them to shovel ash from the decks to keep the ship moving through the pumice. His men sang hoarsely, not for cheer, but to keep from breaking under the endless thunder. And in Batavia, telegraph operators worked by candle, their instruments clicking through the ash-dark day. One message sent, Krakatoa destroyed, entire coastlines lost, thousands feared dead. The world beyond the Indies began to stir, sensing only dimly the scale of the cataclysm. As night descended on the 27th of August, the survivors could not know that Krakatoa's fury had already altered the course of history. The sound waves continued their journey round the globe. The ash, lofted into the highest reaches of the sky, began to spread across hemispheres. The seas, still unsettled, heaved with aftershocks of water, and along the coasts of Java and Sumatra, tens of thousands lay dead, their villages erased. Fires burned where houses had stood. The cries of the living mingled with the silence of the drowned. The eruption had reached its climax, but the consequences, the haunting, world-shaping aftermath, had only just begun. The mountain has fallen silent at last. The seas still boil. The sky is dark, and the people of the Indies stumble through ash and ruin, uncertain if dawn will ever come again. Tomorrow, the world will awaken to find its skies changed, its climate altered, its imagination forever haunted by the name Krakatoa. But tonight, beneath a blackened sky, there is only silence and the long echo of the loudest sound in human history. The morning after the cataclysm was a world reborn, though not in light nor in life. Across Java and Sumatra, the sky remained black. A rain of fine ash drifted ceaselessly, falling like winter snow upon a tropical land. Villages were buried to the rooftops. Palm groves bent beneath the weight of grit, wells filled with black water. In the silence after the roar, survivors wandered in disbelief. Families searched the ruins of their homes, calling names into the darkness. Many heard only the crackle of distant fires, or the moaning of the injured. In Anja, where once a thriving port had stood, only shattered timbers and scattered corpses marked the place. The lighthouse, that proud beacon of Dutch order, lay broken, twisted like a child's toy. On Sumatra's shore, Ketimbang had fared no better. Where once there had been bustling markets and fisher huts, there was only a swamp of brine and mud. Livestock floated lifeless in the paddies. Mothers clutched children who no longer breathed, their faces caked with ash. The living envied the dead. In Batavia, some 100 miles away, the impact was less direct, but still profound. Ash blanketed the city, turning noon into dusk. Church bells tolled as priests led prayers for deliverance. Merchants swept cinders from their doorways, only to see them return in the next gust. The streets filled with rumours, that Java itself was sinking into the sea, that this was the judgment of God, that the end of the world had come at last. But among the Dutch officials, messages began to filter in, carried by weary horsemen and fragmentary telegraph. The coastlines to the west had been obliterated. Tens of thousands, perhaps more, were gone. A catastrophe without precedent in living memory. Even hardened administrators wept. The death toll, as history would later attempt to reckon, reached staggering heights. Over 36,000 lives were lost. Some swept away in towering waves. Others suffocated beneath ash. Still others burned in fire or scalded by boiling sea. The true number may have been higher still, for entire villages vanished, leaving no one to record their loss. In Anja alone, not a soul remained. Every inhabitant, men, women, children, traders, sailors, erased in a single wall of water. The town existed only as a memory in the minds of those who once passed through its harbour. It was, in the cruellest sense, a clean slate. And yet, amidst this ocean of grief, stories of survival emerged, fragile, precious, almost miraculous. A farmer from Lampung told of clinging to the branch of a tree as the sea swept past. The bodies of his neighbours tangled in the debris below him. He floated for hours before the tide set him down in a swamp miles inland. A young Javanese girl survived by sheer chance. Carried on a raft of pumice, she drifted across the strait, her skin blistered by falling ash, her eyes wide with shock. When Dutch sailors pulled her aboard, she whispered only a single word: Ibu, mother. And then there was Captain Lindemann of the Loudon, whose steadfast command had saved hundreds. His ship, battered but unbroken, pushed through the pumice seas and carried its crew to safety. Lindemann himself, hollow-eyed and ash-stained, became a quiet symbol of endurance in the face of unimaginable force. Johann Lindemann never sought fame for what he had done. He filed his reports with the Dutch colonial office in the same plain language any officer might use. Yet the people who had stood upon his decks knew the truth, that without his resolve, his discipline, his refusal to yield even when the world itself collapsed, none of them would have lived to tell the tale. The Loudon became more than a ship that survived Krakatoa. She became a symbol, proof that even in the face of nature's greatest fury, human courage and leadership could carve a path through the storm. Long after the ashes of Krakatoa settled, long after the strange sunsets faded from the skies of Europe, those who had sailed upon the Loudon would remember her as their ark upon a sea of fire. In Europe, news travelled slowly, but when it arrived, the world shuddered. Telegraph reports described entire coastlines destroyed. London newspapers ran headlines of horror. Java in ruins, tens of thousands. Dead in the Indies, illustrations of towering waves and lightning-streaked skies filled the pages. Readers in Paris, Berlin, New York sat by lamplight, imagining the unimaginable. Yet even they could not comprehend the scale. For Krakatoa's legacy was not only in death and ruin, it was in the very skies above them. The ash, hurled 50 miles high, now circled the globe. Carried by stratospheric winds, it spread in a veil that dimmed the sun itself. In the months that followed, sunsets became strange and otherworldly. In London, poets wrote of skies stained blood red, of twilight lingering long after dusk. In New York, painters turned their canvases to shades of copper and violet. Across the world, the heavens were transformed. A haunting beauty, born of devastation. The English painter William Ascroft captured hundreds of sketches of the London sky in the months after Krakatoa. His reds and purples astonished those who saw them. Some wondered if the world was changing forever, and in a sense it had. For Krakatoa did not merely scar the land, it altered the climate. The global temperature dropped by more than a degree in the years that followed. Crops failed in some regions, harvests dwindled. Winters bit harder, summers dimmed. All from the ash of one island, half a world away. It was a sobering reminder that the earth itself holds powers far greater than any empire, any industry, any human ambition. And yet, even as scientists measured and debated, ordinary people simply marvelled. They gazed at the crimson skies and spoke of omens, of divine wrath, of the fragility of their place beneath the heavens. For the survivors in the Indies, however, the wonder was bitter. They rebuilt slowly, painfully, upon the ashes of their former homes. New towns rose further inland, away from the reach of the waves. Graves dotted the hillsides, marked with wooden crosses or simple stones. Families mourned silently, their tears mingling with the ash. Krakatoa itself lay silent, or so it seemed. The caldera steamed, hissed, bubbled, but the titanic roars were gone. The island had collapsed into itself, leaving only shattered remnants around Rakata's southern peak. Sailors gave the place a wide berth, whispering of curses, of ghosts, of an island haunted by the dead. Yet the earth is never still. In time, new vents would open. From the depths of the caldera, a small cone would rise again. Anak Krakatau, the child of Krakatoa, born from the ashes of its parent. A reminder that the cycle was not ended, only paused. And what of memory? For decades, Krakatoa remained etched in the minds of all who had lived through it. Survivors told their children of the day the sky went black. Scientists wrote volumes, tracing barometric waves across continents, measuring the global reach of the blast. The word Krakatoa entered the human vocabulary as a synonym for destruction, for awe, for the sublime power of nature unleashed. Even today, it lingers. In history books, in art, in the whispered awe of travellers crossing the Sunda Strait, where the sea still swirls strangely, as if reluctant to forget. It is a story not only of death, but of perspective. A reminder that in the brief span of human lives, we walk upon a planet that is older, deeper, and infinitely more powerful than we imagine, and sometimes, when the earth chooses to remind us, it does so with fire, and with thunder, and with waves tall enough to erase whole worlds. So the story of Krakatoa closes here. An island shattered, tens of thousands gone, a sky aflame with colours the world had never seen. It is tragedy, it is warning, it is wonder. For in that single day, the 27th of August, 1883, humanity glimpsed its true place upon the earth, small, fragile, mortal, but also enduring, in memory, in resilience, in the telling of the tale. Thank you for listening to Fireside History. If this story moved you, please like, comment and subscribe. Your support helps keep the creative fire burning.